I have done that.
Okay,
We are
great.
recording.
So good afternoon again. Thank you for taking the time to join our program. We've been looking forward to making this presentation to talk about the Triangle, which is a historic event in our history. We're going to have some video clips from the PBS documentary on the fire. We're going to have some dramatic readings from very important people who are involved in responding to what happened. And we're going to talk and kick around ideas about and knowledge. We're going to do a very brief OSHA rules session, very brief, focusing on egress, which is one of the obviously main issues related to Triangle, and talk about ways that we can prevent this from happening in the future, because unfortunately it's still happening. So with that, we're going to start with the first clip from the PBS video.
Can you see that screen, Steve?
Yes.
Oops.
On April 5th, 1911, 400,000 people lined the rain-drenched sidewalks of New York as an empty horse-drawn hearse crept from the dank, narrow streets of the Lower East Side toward the skyscrapers towering over Madison Square. New Yorkers from all walks of life had come to pay tribute to the unidentified victims of the Triangle Fire, the deadliest workplace accident in the city's history. A few weeks earlier, the workers had been forgotten cogs in America's immense industrial machine. Now, 1 in 10 New Yorkers were there to claim them as their own.
Public conscience thought they had failed these young women. They had somehow not protected them.
There was a recognition, wait, these girls can't die in vain. That was said over and over and over again, as if the city had somehow turned its back on them.
If there weren't massive funerals, it would have been very easy for the city and the city officials to say, well, this is it's sort of a natural disaster, it's a terrible thing, but there's nothing anyone can do about it.
If you ask the average American, is it okay for workers to work in a shop where the conditions are so dangerous that it could cost them their lives and not have government intervene? Most people would say no. There's a line. The Triangle Fire drew that line. It burned that line, really, into the nation's conscience.
My name is Clara Lemlich. I am a member of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. I am a working girl, one of those fighting against intolerable conditions. At the huge meeting of garment workers at Cooper Union in 1909, I took the stage and declared, I have listened to all the speakers and I have no further patience for talk. I am tired of listening to speakers who talk in generalities. I urged that we go on a general strike, but instead of being listened to, we were beaten by thugs and policemen alike, arrested, fined, and thrown in jail. The factory owners hired thugs to beat me, and now I stand here bruised and with broken ribs. Many supported us and our right to take an orderly stand to improve our working conditions. But in the end, the strike that was started at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was not won at the Triangle. Progress had been made for many workers, but not for the Triangle workers. In the end, they were defeated.
Minutes earlier, a dropped cigarette had started a fire on the 8th floor of the Ash Building. Triangle workers dashed for the stairs, the elevators, and the fire escape. Max Blank and Isaac Harris on 10, warned by phone from below, made their way to the roof, where they scrambled across to the building next door. In the panic, no one alerted the 200 sewing machine operators on the 9th floor.
I turned to one of the girls who was putting on her hat and said, "Where does that smoke come from?"
Before I could move, everybody in the shop started to scream and holler.
Startled machine operators scanned the floor for friends and family and for the fastest way out. The everyday exit, the Green Street stairway, was already blocked by smoke and fire. Some women fled out a window and onto the fire escape to the back alley. Others ran toward two tiny passenger elevators that led to Washington Place.
The first time the elevator came up, the girls rushed in. And it was crowded in a half second. The elevator driver struggled with the door and finally closed it. I was left with those who didn't make the first trip.
Sewing machine operators pushed their way down narrow aisles clogged with wicker baskets, loose fabric, their own co-workers.
I was throwing them out of the way. I was pushing them down. I was only looking out for my own life. A young lady began to pull me in the back of my dress. I kicked her with my foot, and I don't know what became of her.
I jumped over two lines of machines away from the flames. I looked and I saw an old Italian woman. She couldn't jump over the machines.
Panic rose when the women inside heard the overburdened fire escape pull from its masonry. Heard the cries of their fellow workers tumbling off the twisting structure. As the smoke grew thicker, some were drawn toward the light of windows overlooking Washington Square. People were starting to gather at the Ash Building now. Passers-by and picnickers, students from nearby New York University, and a young reporter from the United Press.
There was a living picture in each window. 4 girls waving their arms. "Call the firemen," they screamed. "Get a ladder." We heard a fire engine in the distance. "Here they come," we yelled. "Stay there."
The fire was spreading faster now, feeding itself on piles of shirtwaists, wooden tables, even the fabric dust that hung in the air. The only precaution the Triangle owners had taken against this sort of disaster, a dozen red pails of water, sat impotent in the corners. The workers who remained inside pushed toward the Washington Place passenger elevator. They knew time was running out. This was probably the last run.
The elevator came up, and I was swept into the car by the crowd behind me. The last thing I remember seeing was my sister Marie, enveloped in flames.
As the elevators descended, workers started jumping into the elevator shaft, first trying to slide down the cable or ride the top of the cars, but then the crowd behind these women in the open elevator doorways are pushing to escape from the flames, and now people are being pushed, falling into that elevator shaft.
There was one final hope for the trapped triangle workers. Opening the locked door to the Washington Place stairway, but no one had the key.
I saw Bernstein trying to open the door. He couldn't open it. And then I saw Margaret bending down on her knees. The trail of her dress and the ends of her hair began to burn. And then came a big smoke, and I couldn't see. I just knew it was Margaret.
People were screaming about their children and anything else. I noticed Bernstein going like a wildcat on the windows. Then I saw the flames covering him. Smoke was coming up all around us. I couldn't see anything else. I felt a draft. I wanted to make my way over to where it came from. I wanted to open the window.
It had been less than 5 minutes since the first alarm, but more than 1,000 people had crowded around the Ash building. They watched as the firemen raised their ladders to their full extension. They barely reached the 6th floor, 30 feet shy of the trapped triangle workers.
People began to holler, "Raise the ladders, raise the ladders." But we had the ladders up.
One girl climbed under the window sash. Those behind her tried to hold her back. Then she dropped into space.
I saw groups of women embracing each other and leaping to the sidewalk. The firemen were helpless. The nets were ripped from their hands. Many stooped and picked up the nets again with their hands bleeding.
The last workers were trapped against the blackened windows, burning to death before our very eyes. The glass they were pressed against shattered. Down came the bodies in a shower, burning, smoking, flaming bodies with disheveled hair trailing upward.
The bodies lay there on the sidewalk, 3 or 4 high, burning. And we had to play the hoses on them.
I looked upon the heap of dead bodies, and I remembered these girls were the shirtwaist makers. I remembered their great strike of last year.
The crowd knew the triangle. They knew the cause of these workers. And here now, of all places, this same factory had gone up in flames, and hundreds of these workers who had said that the conditions were not safe, that the fate of workers was perilous in New York. The justice of the strikers' cause had been underlined in blood on these sidewalks.
In the week following the fire, there were meetings at which many expressed their public outrage over their tragedy and their sense of public guilt.
I am Dr. Anna Shaw. I speak out for the rights of women. As I read the terrible story of the fire, I ask, am I my sister's keeper? For the Lord said to me, where is thy sister? And I bowed my head and said, I am responsible. Yes, every man and woman in this city is responsible. Don't try to lay it on someone else. Don't try to lay it on some official. We are responsible. You men, forget not that you are responsible. As voters, it was your business, and you should have been about your business. If you are incompetent, then in the name of heaven, stand aside and let us try. There was a time when a woman worked in the home with her weaving, her sewing, her candle making. All that has been changed. Now she can no longer regulate her own conditions, her own hours of labor. She has been driven into the market with no voice, and the laws and and powerless to defend herself. The most cowardly thing that men ever did was when they tied woman's hands and left her to be the food for the flames.
I am Rabbi Stephen Weiss, and I say that this is a day for contriteness and redeeming penitence. It is not the action of God, but the inaction of man that made it that is responsible. The disaster was not the deed of God, but the greed of man. There is no inevitable disaster which could not have been foreseen. Some of us foresaw it. We have laws that in a crisis we find are no laws at all, and we have enforcement that when the hour of trial comes, we find is no enforcement. Let us lift up the industrial standards until they will bear inspection. And when we go before the legislatures, let us not allow them to put us off forever with the old answer, we have no money. If we have no money for the necessary enforcement of the laws which safeguard the lives of workers, it is because much of our money is wasted and squandered and stolen. I call for the creation of a committee of 25 who will gather facts about this tragedy and thus provide a basis for the drafting of a proposed remedial legislation.
I am Rose Snyderman. I have seen these girls beaten and jailed, and now I have seen them burned and dead. I would be a traitor to those poor burned bodies if I were to come here to talk good fellowship. This is not the first time girls have been burned alive in this city. Every week I must learn of untimely death of one of my sister workers. Every year, thousands of us are maimed. The life of men and women is so cheap and property is so scared. There are so many of us for one job. It matters little if 140 odd are burned to death. We have tried you, citizens. We are trying you now, and you have a couple of dollars for the sorrowing mothers and brothers and sisters by way of charity gift. But every time the workers come out in the only way they know to protest against conditions which are unbearable, the strong hand of the law is allowed to press down heavily upon us. Public officials have only words of warning for us, warnings that we must be intensely orderly and must be intensely peaceable. And they have the workhouse just back of all their warnings. The strong hand of the law beats us back when we rise, back into the conditions that make life unbearable. I can't talk fellowship to you who are gathered here Too much blood has spilled. I know from experience, it is up to the working people to save themselves. And the only way is through a strong working class.
The tragedy of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire brought people from many different walks of life together. Wealthy women suffragists, clergy, politicians, and workers all responded in kind that more must be done to make factories and workplaces safer for its workers. After the fire and the resulting public outcry, government could not avoid establishing laws around workplace safety. Years later, Frances Perkins, who had witnessed the Triangle Fire, went on to become the Secretary of Labor under Franklin D. Roosevelt, the first woman appointed to the U.S. Cabinet. She spoke of the horror of that fine, bright spring afternoon and what would come of it.
Out of that terrible episode came a self-examination of stricken conscience in which the people of this state saw for the first time the individual worth and value of each of those 146 people who fell or were burned in that great fire. And we too, the great human value of every individual who was injured in an accident by a machine. There was a stricken conscience of public guilt, and we all felt that we had been wrong, that something was wrong with that building, which we had accepted, or the tragedy never would have happened. Moved by this sense of stricken guilt, we banded ourselves together to find a way by law to prevent this kind of disaster. And so it was that the Factory Commission that sprang out of the ashes of the tragedy made an investigation that took 4 years to complete, 4 years of searching, of public hearings, of legislative formulations, of pressuring through the legislature, the greatest battery of bills to prevent disasters and hardships affecting working people, of passing laws the likes of which have never been seen in any 4 sessions of any state legislature. It was the beginning of a new and important drive to bring the humanities to the life of the brothers and sisters we all had in the working groups of these United States. The stirring up of the public conscience and the act of the people in penitence brought about not only these laws, which make New York State to this day the best state in relation to factory laws, it was also that stirring of conscience which brought about in 1932 the introduction of a new element into the life of the whole United States. We had, in the election of Franklin Roosevelt, the beginning of what has become to be called a New Deal for the United States. But it was based really upon the experiences that we had had in New York State and upon the sacrifices of those who we faithfully remember with affection and respect, died in that terrible fire on March 25th, 1911. They did not die in vain, and we will never forget them.
Unfortunately, there have been other workplace fire disasters since the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. These are a couple in New Haven, January 25th, 1957, 15 people died. Panic blamed for deaths of the 15 in New Haven Holocaust. Again, the same issue of inability to get out of the workplace. Thanks. And there was a very significant fire in 1991 in Hamlet, North Carolina. 25 workers died, 55 were injured in a catastrophe fire. They never had a drill, at least while I was working there. There was no sprinkler system. There was a lot of that you knew that wasn't right, but if you complained about it, you got fired. That's a familiar theme. You all know about the Rana Plaza catastrophe in Bangladesh, which occurred in 2013, April. Workers were well aware of cracks in the foundation. There were complaints, and they were told the same thing. You don't like it here, get out. And disaster happened soon after. There were also a lot of fires that have taken place in Southeast Asia, and these are a list of some of them. Bill Chartel is going to talk about these disasters that have occurred and talk about some issues related to that we should consider.
Is that my intro?
Yep. Go to it.
Can you see me? I lost my camera somehow.
Well, we can see you, Bill.
All right, all right. So this is a very familiar topic to me as a Connecticut activist. In 1984, the world's worst occupational disaster in Bhopal, India, was perpetrated by Union Carbide, which had its headquarters in Connecticut. And we took about a dozen of us Koch activists, demanded a meeting, and we went into their international headquarters and met with their top officials. They were so scared of public opinions that they had to talk to us. And we started, from that point, we started trying to get an international perspective on our work, which, you know, now that textile manufacturing has gone international, I mean, it's always been international, but when Koch first started, you know, what, 40 years ago, most of the garments that Americans wore were made in the United States. But now they're made all over the world, and particularly in China. And the second largest is Bangladesh, where their capital city, Dhaka, one of the largest cities in the world, where the huge building collapsed about 10 years ago, and 1,000 people died suddenly. They knew the building was cracking and falling apart, and they ordered the workers into the building, even though a lot of people knew that it was going to fall that day. And they were in a rush. And garment workers are always in a rush because of fast fashion. You guys know about that? Fashions change very quickly, and when they change, the garment manufacturers have to keep up with it. So they have to switch products very quickly, and they're always on deadlines. And this rush is part of occupational death. I think a lot of you know that. I mean, when I worked in a factory, if I was in a hurry, that's when I got hurt. And when the factory owners push the whole process, that's when people get killed. That's how people got killed in 2010 in Connecticut, in Middletown, at the clean energy plant. They were cutting corners because they had a big construction project, and they wanted, if they made it by a certain deadline, they would get a big bonus. So they blew the place up. 6 workers died. And it's funny because a lot of the reaction at the beginning, it isn't funny, it's horrifying. One of the commentators about the Triangle disaster said, this was not an act of God. This was not something that had to happen. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people in 2010 in Middletown said, oh, you know, construction work is dangerous, and we never know when we leave for work in the morning if we're going to come home. We had to fight against that 100 years later. So I'm going to talk for a minute about a fire that happened about 2 weeks ago in Egypt. 20 workers died in a garment factory. I tried to do some research on it, and things are so loose in Egypt and in most of the poor countries that all the article said was that health and safety conditions and fire hazards are commonplace and unregulated in Egyptian factories. And I went into one of their newspapers called Egypt Today, where they had a section on business, sports, and fires. There was a whole section dedicated every day to fires because they're so common. A lot of people in Egypt died in emergency rooms during the height of the COVID disaster. The hospitals burned up, with all the oxygen in them. Now these are places, where the clothing for Americans are made. After the Dhaka disaster, there was a big sort of upsurge, just like there was after the Triangle disaster, and the investigations of the factories started trying to change conditions there. But if you compare conditions in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 2010 with conditions in New York City in 1911, one way of comparing is to look at wages. The workers in the Triangle Fire, despite the fact that they didn't have any union, were 10 times higher than what the women make in Bangladesh right now. They make 30 cents an hour. And you can tell how important people's lives are in many respects by how much money they make. And when you make 30 cents an hour, and when 3/4 of the workers are women from rural areas who can't read and write, you know that their lives are in danger every time they go to work. So I just want to end in saying that there is things that we can do as Connecticut. I don't know, Pam, if you guys have know about the Clean Clothes campaign. It's mostly a European thing. But it's worldwide. There's 250 organizations involved in it. And they take a look at conditions in the gigantic textile and garment sector where there's 75 million workers, 3/4 of them women, like I said, and they figure out ways to try to help their conditions. I think it would be good for Connecticut to reach out to local universities where students are interested in this kind of stuff. It's hard to get a worker in a plant. I mean, when I was working in a plant, it was hard for me to focus on some health and safety conditions outside of my plant. But our children have an international perspective, and we need to mobilize them. The Triangle disaster is ongoing all over the world, especially in the poor countries. Thanks.
Thank you, Will, and we should definitely talk more about this campaign.
Good.
So now we're going to move on to prevention. I'm really going to cut this short. This is part of OSHA has training materials, PowerPoint, and so forth. I'm just going to focus on a few of the egress issues because they were paramount in the Triangle situation. Next. So we know there are a lot of fires, 5,000 workers each year are injured, long and tragic history, which you're well aware of as we've just seen. Next. So these are the basics of getting out of a factory or building. The exit route, you need exit access all the way through the actual exit, and an exit discharge area where you can safely be getting after you've gotten out of the building. Basic requirements for this are basically enough exits in proper arrangement, must be separated with fire resistant materials. Needless to say, these are all things that have happened since the Triangle Fire. Openings into the exit must be limited to those necessary to allow access. Opening into the exit must be protected by approved self-closing fire doors. Discharge area obviously has to be big enough and in a safe place for people to congregate. Also, of course, very important as part of this process that that people are aware of who's in the building, visitors and workers, so there can be a full accounting that everyone has been able to get out of the building. And here's a classic one. Obviously, this was what the problem has been in a lot of these disasters. One way or another, doors have been locked. Panic bars are accepted, but I've seen places where people do have some kind of code to put in, and that is not allowed at all. No special knowledge to be able to get out of a building immediately. Then these slides all have to do with the exit path itself in terms of doors opening out in the direction that people need to travel. Next, there's some slides about marking of doors. Exit route. This actually, I've seen a couple times the 28 inches wide. It's not very much at all, but that has to be maintained. That's, a little over 2 feet. There are requirements in terms of the ceiling and no point that's less than 6 feet 8 inches from the floor. Now, I've seen plenty of problems in this area, and probably a lot of you have too. Retail stores, hospitals, other facilities, exits, the exit access being blocked by things that just shouldn't be there. Can't tell you how many times I went into places and had to straighten that out. Also maintaining that sprinklers and other safety devices are well maintained and checked regularly. Okay. Exit marking. You can run through these quickly because I want us to have time to talk about issues later. Bend in the road and the exit, needs to be clearly marked. Doors that are not an exit need to be marked. And there should be an emergency action plan. And I'd be curious if people want to talk about in your workplaces, do you have an emergency action plan? How often are there drills? Are things clearly posted that people know how to get out of building quickly? In the various buildings I worked in, there was one where we never did anything related to this, and others where it was regularly scheduled that we had drills every month or two. The next. Okay. And there should be a fire prevention plan. This, as I said, this PowerPoint is available. It goes into fire prevention plan and extinguishers and all, but I just wanted to focus on a few of the issues in terms of egress, getting out of the building. And also to mention, there are situations obviously where you don't want to evacuate. And there was a situation in one of the plants that I visited where under OSHA regulations, there has to be a separate warning system, whether to evacuate or take cover. And they didn't have that. And so what happened was the alarm went off and people started to go in the parking lot. And it turned out what the issue was the tornado. So one of the things actually in the next slide, it talks about what's included in fire prevention. I think there's something about different emergencies that could be. Anyway.
I'm trying, Steve. It's locked up. So.
Oh, okay. Basically, the point I wanted to make is that on the list on these ocean materials and all, they talk about tornadoes, but that's hardly the only reason why you'd want to take cover rather than evacuate. And clearly, one of those is an active shooter. And just in the last few days, we've seen that workers were killed in Boulder, Colorado, and in Atlanta, Georgia, because of an active shooter situation.
Yeah, sorry. So we're going to switch the screen sharing for Pamela.
Okay, I'm going to do that right now.
Thank you.
Give me a moment. Let's see.
I think we're moving on to compensation, right?
Okay, hold on. Let's see. All right. Thank you so much, Mark.
So one of the additional tragedies of Triangle was that there was no compensation for the workers. The law had been declared unconstitutional in New York State the day before. And wanted to highlight this: compulsory compensation for injured workmen strikes at property rights. Folks, this is not a dead issue. This is exactly the argument that is currently being made against labor law. Organizers, union organizers working to organize farm workers in California right now are faced with legal challenges. The company's going to court saying they're not allowed on the property at all because that's a violation of the employer's property rights. So this has been something from the beginning, and this is still a very current issue that we're facing. So every year there is a commemoration, a ceremony at the site of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. It hasn't happened this year or last year because of COVID, but these are some remarks that were prepared for that ceremony 4 years ago in 2017. We are gathered today to remember and honor the lives of the 146 workers who died here, victims of negligent workplace homicide. Most were very young immigrant women from Eastern Europe and Italy who were exploited, working very long hours to help support their families. Like today's immigrants, they deserve to be treated fairly, with dignity and respect, and to earn a just wage in a safe workplace. How sad it is that it takes tragedies like this fire to enact needed public protections related to fire and building safety. There were other legislative legacies born from the ashes of this fire. Thousands of garment workers joined labor unions because they knew that in coming together, they would be stronger to win better compensation, job security, and safer workplaces. New laws arose across the United States after the fire with the clear intent to compensate for lost wages, cover medical costs, and provide death benefits to workers' families. For the intended benefits of this no-fault social support system, workers lost their right to sue their employers for work-related injuries and illnesses. But for the past few decades, well-financed corporate interests have consistently won a wide array of takebacks, seriously harming injured workers' ability to receive the resources and services they need to rebuild their lives. They have violated the public resolve and protections which came out of this fire. So in the words of Mother Jones, let us mourn today for the 146 workers who needlessly perished here in 1911, and let us fight like hell for our right to a safe workplace and for prompt, just compensation and services for all workers who are injured or made ill by their work. So currently there is some legislation in Connecticut, and Pamela's going to talk about that.
Before I talk, actually, I was wondering, is there any workers' comp attorneys? I can't scroll right now because I'm sharing screen, but is there any workers' comp attorneys present that would like to speak about HB 6478? You're welcome to unmute yourself. I know we had a couple on before. They may not be still with us, or maybe otherwise disposed. But so Connecticut is supporting this HB 6478 because of a number of reasons. There's 5 different sections. I'm not going to go into all of them, but the first or the The one in section 4 specifically addresses COVID-19 with the extension of the time frame that workers may claim workers' compensation benefits for work time lost because of contracting COVID-19. Governor Lamont had originally signed an executive order that only allowed for 2 months of rebuttable presumption. And this one will expand the presumption for workers who were required to be at a work site and contracted COVID-19 between March 10th, 2020 through April 20th of 2021. So those workers will not be required to prove that their illness was a result of a workplace exposure. Instead, the onus will be on the employer to demonstrate that the employee contracted the virus outside of his employment. So communicable diseases contracted at work are actually already considered compensable. The difference in this language is that now the employer has to prove, the employee no longer needs to prove workplace exposure. The second piece of this that I wanted to mention is a change which increases the burial allowance for workers who die as a result of a workplace injury or an illness such as COVID-19. Up until we're talking about it now, it's the actual amount for a burial for a fatally injured worker is $4,000. In Rhode Island, it is $20,000. In New York, it is $12,500. So this bill would ask to bring up the burial expenses to $20,000. And those left to mourn a family member whose tragic passing from a workplace injury or illness should not be left struggling to provide a dignified burial for their loved one. The bill has had its public hearing, and I know we had some excellent support from numerous union members and workers' comp attorneys. And again, Connecticut is supporting this, and we hope that it will be voted out of the Labor Committee and then go on to become law. Go ahead. Oh, I forgot. I'm sharing the screen. Okay. So just a little introduction of Connecticut for those of you who don't know of us. We're a nonprofit organization. Our focus is on educating, supporting, and training workers about how to stay healthy and safe in their workplace. And this is why Connecticut was started. In fact, we have one of its original founders, Will Shortell, who spoke about some of the work that we need to continue, and we continue some of that today with workplace training, health and safety training for jobs programs, and where we connect workers with OSHA, and we are providing programs like this so that people can be made more aware of how history continues to repeat itself, unfortunately. And a special thanks today goes to Steve Moser for organizing and presenting this program, as well as to Mark Catlin for his technical talents. Some of the voices you heard today include Ashley Collins for Dr. Anna Shaw, Stephen Magro for Rabbi Stephen Wise, Deborah Pease for Rose Schneiderman, and Ann Bracker for Frances Perkins. Thank you all for your lovely voices. And of course, Bill, thank you so much for bringing us kind of full circle in terms of understanding how some of what we do in our daily lives, something as simple as buying clothes, can continue to support sweatshop labor, which I think most of us are completely against. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to, let's see, stop sharing screen if I can figure out how to do this. There we go.
There was a
So-
request in the chat box
Oh,
about
okay, go ahead.
get a copy of the video or the presentation. I'm sure we can work something out about that. Certainly the
Yes, I am recording it right now. So we will have this recording available. And I guess,
Are there any questions or people want to discuss any issues? I don't think we have to get off right at 5 o'clock. So
no.
next month is obviously the 50th anniversary of OSHA and NIOSH. There'll be Worker Memorial Day week activities that COSH groups all around the country will be doing, and we'll have a few events here in Connecticut as well. So keep that in mind, and we hope that you participate. And for those of you in Connecticut, let us know if there are particular topics you want training on. Look us up. We have a lot of resources.
That's right. And we will be offering another program similar to this with this historical perspective that moves into how it's appropriate for today. Next will be focused on the Gauley Bridge mine tragedy. And we'll be developing that program and getting that information out to you. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Take
Great
care.
job.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank
It
you.
was very nice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming. All right.